Any last words, Barber? My son-in-law Bradley sneered these words at me while 500 of Washington, D.C.'s wealthiest elites laughed into their crystal champagne flutes. He held a microphone in one hand and a wooden shoe shine box in the other, offering it to me like a piece of rotting meat. He thought he was looking at Cedric McNeil, the 71-year-old failure who swept hair off the floor for $10 a cut. He had no idea he was actually staring down the barrel of a retired FBI special agent who had just flagged his entire financial empire for international money laundering. I looked at the shoeshine box, then I looked at his pale, sweating face. I didn't take the box. Instead, I leaned in close, ignoring the security guards stepping forward, and I whispered 7 words that turned his arrogance into pure terror. But before I tell you what I said and how I brought down $1 billion Ponzi scheme with nothing but a pair of scissors and a burner phone, I need to know one thing. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have feared you? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that silence is sometimes the loudest weapon. My name is Cedric McNeil, but on the streets of Southeast DC, everyone just calls me Mac. For the last 10 years, I have run a small barbershop called Fade and Soul. To the naked eye, I am just an old man with shaky hands and a bad back struggling to pay rent in a neighborhood that is slowly being eaten alive by gentrification. That is exactly what I want people to see. When you spend 30 years in the financial intelligence unit of the FBI tracking cartel money moving through shell companies, you learn that being invisible is the only armor that works. I retired to find peace. I retired to be a father to my daughter Maya and a grandfather to her children. But peace is a luxury men like me rarely get to keep. It was a Tuesday evening when the humiliation began. The venue was the grand ballroom of the Willard Intercontinental Hotel, a place that smelled of old money and fresh arrogance. Gold leaf covered the ceiling and the chandeliers were large enough to crush a man. This was the 5th anniversary gala for Sterling Horizons, the financial technology company founded by my son-in-law, Bradley Sterling. Maya had begged me to come. She said it was important for the family image. She said Bradley wanted to honor me. I should have known better. My gut had been screaming at me since I put on my 30-year-old tuxedo that smelled faintly of mothballs and cedar. I stood in the back of the room holding a glass of sparkling water watching the sharks circle. The room was filled with senators, tech investors, and lobbyists, the kind of people who shake your hand while checking your watch to see if it is worth stealing. Bradley stood on the raised stage bathed in a spotlight that made his teeth look unnaturally white. He was 35 years old, handsome in a way that felt manufactured, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my barbershop made in a year. He raised his hands, silencing the applause. "Thank you all for coming," Bradley boomed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "Tonight is about growth. It is about vision. But we cannot forget where we came from. We cannot forget the little people who keep us grounded." My stomach tightened. I saw Maya standing near the front of the stage. She looked beautiful in a red silk gown, but her eyes were darting around nervously. She knew what was coming. She had been conditioned to accept his cruelty as comedy. "I would like to invite a very special guest to the stage," Bradley continued, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto me. "My father-in-law, Cedric McNeil. Come on up here, Mac. Don't be shy." The spotlight swung around, blinding me. The applause was polite, confused. I didn't move at first. I felt the weight of 500 pairs of eyes judging my outdated tuxedo, my posture, my very existence. A security guard near me nudged my elbow. "Go on, sir," he muttered. I walked slowly toward the stage. My knee, injured during a raid in Miami in '98, throbbed with every step. I kept my face neutral. This was cover. Always maintain cover. When I reached the stage, Bradley threw an arm around my shoulder. His grip was too tight, dominant. He smelled of expensive scotch and desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man is a hero," Bradley announced. The crowd murmured appreciatively. "But not the kind of hero you read about in Forbes. Mac here has spent his entire life standing on his feet, cutting hair in a little shop down on 8th Street. He sweeps floors. He cleans combs. He listens to people complain about the weather. It is a humble life. A simple life." The condescension dripped from his voice like oil. He wasn't praising me. He was contrasting his success with my perceived failure. He was using me as a prop to show how far he had risen above the filth of the working class. "But I know times are tough," Mac Bradley said, his tone shifting to mock sympathy. "I know the rent is going up. I know you are struggling to keep the lights on at that little shop. And since you are family, I wanted to give you something tonight, something to help you expand your business." He signaled to an assistant who walked on stage carrying a wooden box. Bradley took it and held it up. It was a vintage shoeshine kit. Inside were brushes, rags, and tins of polish. "Since you are already down on your knees sweeping hair, I figured you could make a few extra bucks shining the shoes of the successful men in this room," Bradley said, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "There is no shame in it, Mac. Honest work for an honest man. Maybe you can start with mine later." The silence in the room was absolute for a heartbeat. Then a few people in the front row started to chuckle. The chuckle spread, turning into a wave of laughter. They weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at the absurdity of it, the powerful CEO and the pathetic shoeshine boy. I looked at Maya. I needed her to say something. I needed her to stand up and scream that her father was a decorated veteran of the agency, a man who had put criminals behind bars who were twice as dangerous as her husband. But she didn't. She looked down at her Manolo Blahnik heels, her shoulders hunching forward. She was terrified of him. That hurt more than the laughter. That broke something inside me that I didn't know was still intact. Bradley thrust the box toward my chest. "Go on, take it. It is a gift." The spotlight felt hot on my skin. My heart rate didn't spike. My breathing remained steady. This is what training does. When the enemy exposes himself, you don't react emotionally. You analyze. You find the weakness. And Bradley Sterling was nothing but weaknesses stitched together in an Italian suit. I didn't reach for the box. I let his arm hang there, heavy and awkward. The laughter in the room began to die down, replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Bradley's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. "Take the box, Mac," he hissed low enough that the microphone didn't pick it up. "Don't embarrass me." I took a step closer to him. I invaded his personal space, crossing the invisible barrier that rich men build around themselves. I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the pupils dilated from adrenaline and perhaps something chemical. I saw the micro tremors in his hand holding the microphone. I leaned in my lips inches from his ear. To the crowd, it looked like an intimate family moment, a father-in-law thanking his generous benefactor. "Cuidado, Bradley." I whispered, my voice rough like gravel. He blinked, confused. "Your wallet is leaking." I continued, my tone flat and devoid of emotion. "I know about the transfer to the shell company in Panama yesterday. $50 million. And I know the liquidity in your main operating account is currently sitting at -4%. You aren't offering me a shoeshine box because you are rich. You are doing it because you need to distract these investors from the fact that you are broke." Bradley jerked back as if I had burned him. The shoeshine box slipped from his sweaty fingers and crashed onto the stage floor. The brushes scattered. A tin of polish rolled off the edge of the stage and landed with a loud clatter in the silent ballroom. The microphone screeched with feedback. Bradley stared at me, his face draining of color. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the terror of a con artist who realizes his mark has seen the cards. "What did you say to me?" Bradley stammered, forgetting his audience for a second. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. The smile of a man who knows where the bodies are buried. "I said shine your own damn shoes," I replied, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. Bradley's shock turned instantly to rage. Humiliation is a dangerous weapon, and I had just turned it back on him. He motioned frantically to the side of the stage. "Security," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get him out of here. He is drunk. My father-in-law is drunk and confused. Get him out." 2 massive security guards in black suits materialized from the shadows. They grabbed my arms, their fingers digging into my biceps. I didn't resist. I didn't struggle. That is what a drunk man would do. That is what a helpless old barber would do. I let them drag me backward. As they pulled me away, I locked eyes with Maya one last time. She was weeping silently, her hand covering her mouth. I wanted to tell her it was going to be okay. I wanted to tell her that Daddy was back on the job. But I couldn't blow my cover yet. "Don't hurt him," Maya cried out weakly, but Bradley grabbed her arm, pulling her close, whispering something angry into her ear. The guards shoved me through the heavy velvet curtains and into the service corridor. The music from the ballroom started up again, a loud, upbeat jazz number designed to drown out the awkwardness. "You need to leave, sir," one of the guards grunted, pushing me toward the freight elevator. "Mr. Sterling says you are banned from the premises." I straightened my tuxedo jacket. I brushed a piece of lint off my lapel. "Don't worry, gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "I am leaving, but you might want to update your resumes. I don't think your boss is going to be able to make payroll next month." The guard frowned, confused, but he shoved me into the elevator anyway. As the metal doors slid shut, sealing me off from the world of caviar and lies, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out not a comb, but a small, secure satellite phone that I hadn't used in 6 years. I dialed a number from memory, a number that didn't appear in any phone book. It rang once. "This line is for emergency use," only a robotic voice answered. "State your clearance code, Agent McNeil." I said, staring at my reflection in the polished steel doors. "Code Omega-7 Razor. Reactivate my file. I have a target." The elevator descended, taking me back down to the street level, back to the gutter where Bradley thought I belonged. But he was wrong. He thought he had kicked a stray dog. He didn't realize he had just woken up a wolf. And the thing about wolves is we don't bark. We hunt. I walked out of the hotel's back exit and into the humid DC night. The air smelled of exhaust and rain. I needed to get back to the barber shop. Not to cut hair, but to open the safe in the floorboards that I hadn't touched since the day Esther died. The war had officially begun. The morning sun hit the cracked pavement outside Fade and Soul with a humidity that promised a storm later in the day. My shop sits on a corner that real estate sharks call a gold mine and my neighbors call home. To the untrained eye, it is just a place with 4 hydraulic chairs wrapped in red vinyl and a checkered floor that has seen better days. But location is everything in intelligence work. We are 6 blocks from the Capitol building and 3 blocks from the finest steakhouse in D.C., where politicians trade favors over martini lunches. While the politicians eat inside, their drivers wait outside. And when those drivers need a trim or a place to use the bathroom or just someone to listen to their troubles, they come to Mac. They sit in my chair and they talk. They talk about who is sleeping with whom, who is paying off gambling debts, and who is taking private meetings in parked cars. For 10 years, I have been the invisible confessor of Washington. They think I am just an old man who likes jazz and the smell of bay rum aftershave. They do not know that I have a memory like a steel trap and a file in my head on every boss they drive for. I was sweeping up the morning rush hair when the door chimed. I didn't need to look up to know it wasn't a customer. The scent of expensive cologne hit me before the man did. It was a smell that tried too hard to mask the stench of greed. I leaned on my broom and watched a man in a charcoal suit step onto my linoleum. He looked around with a sneer, wrinkling his nose at the smell of barbicide and talcum powder. He was young, sharp, and holding a leather briefcase like it was a weapon. "Mr. McNeil," he said, not offering a hand. "My name is Julian Thorne. I represent Sterling Horizons and Mr. Bradley Sterling." I didn't answer. I just swept a pile of dark curls into the dustpan. "Mr. Sterling is a generous man." Thorne continued, stepping over the pile of hair. "He feels terrible about the misunderstanding at the gala last night. He wants to make amends. He wants to help you retire in comfort." I walked behind the counter and popped the cap off a glass bottle of Coca-Cola. I took a long sip before speaking. "Tell Bradley I don't need his charity. And tell him next time he wants to talk to me, he should come himself instead of sending his errand boy." Thorne's fake smile vanished. He placed the briefcase on one of my empty barber chairs. I tightened my grip on the soda bottle. That chair belonged to my customers, honest men who worked for a living, not vultures. "It is not charity," Mac Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. "It is an offer. We are prepared to buy this building. The land value is skyrocketing. We plan to build a mixed-use high-rise here, luxury condos, retail space, a monument to the future. We are offering you $200,000 over market value." I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "200,000, I asked. "This building has been here since 1960. My wife and I bought it with the money she saved cleaning houses for 30 years. You think you can buy 30 years of sweat with a check?" Thorne sighed, clicking open the briefcase. He pulled out a glossy architectural rendering. It showed a glass tower gleaming in the sun. My shop was gone, erased. "Look, old man," Thorne said, his tone shifting from sales to threats. "You can take the carrot or you can get the stick. Bradley has friends in the zoning commission. He has friends in the city council. We can have this block rezoned for commercial development within a month. Your property taxes will triple. The health department will start finding violations you didn't know existed. We will bleed you dry until you beg us to take it for pennies. Eminent domain is a nasty business." I stared at him. This was the invasion. They didn't just want to beat me, they wanted to erase me. I stepped out from behind the counter. I moved slower than I used to, but I still took up space. I walked until I was chest to chest with Thorne. "Get out," I said quietly. Thorne didn't back down. He looked past me to the wall behind the register. There hung the only decoration in the shop that mattered. A framed photograph of Esther taken the day we opened the shop. She was laughing, her hand on my shoulder, looking at me like I was the only man in the world. "Is that her?" Thorne asked, gesturing to the photo with a dismissive wave. "The maid who saved her pennies. Cute. But sentimental value doesn't cash checks, Mac. Don't let a dead woman's memory make you homeless." The air in the shop went still. The sound of the traffic outside faded away. My heart didn't race. It slowed down. That is what happens before the kill, the cold calm. I reached out and grabbed Thorne by the lapels of his expensive suit. I didn't shove him. I pulled him close, so close I could see the contact lenses in his eyes. "You have 3 seconds to leave my shop," I whispered. "If you ever mention her name again, I will not call the police. I will not call a lawyer. I will find you, and I will make you wish you had never learned to speak." Thorne saw something in my eyes then. He saw the thing Bradley had missed. He saw the predator behind the prey. He stumbled back, grabbing his briefcase, almost tripping over his own feet. "You are making a mistake!" he yelled as he backed toward the door. "You are crazy! Bradley will bury you!" He slammed the door behind him. The bell chimed violently, then silence returned. I stood there for a long time, my breathing steady. I looked at Esther's photo. Her smile hadn't changed, but the world around it had. They wanted war. They wanted to take the only thing she left me. I walked to the front door. I flipped the sign from open to closed. I pulled the blinds down, blocking out the sun and the view of the Capitol dome. I walked to the back of the shop, past the chairs, past the mirrors, into the small storage room that smelled of bleach and old towels. I pushed aside a stack of cardboard boxes filled with shampoo. I knelt on the floor. My knees cracked, a reminder of my age, but my hands were steady. I used a small pry bar to lift a loose floorboard in the corner. Underneath was a floor safe installed in 1995. I spun the dial, left to 10, right to 24, left to 7. The heavy steel door clicked open. There was no money inside, no gold bars, no jewelry. Inside lay a black satellite phone, heavy and outdated, the kind that connects directly to secure servers in Virginia. Next to it was a Sig Sauer P226 pistol, cleaned and oiled, wrapped in an old cloth. And beneath the gun was a small black notebook. I picked up the notebook. It was tattered, the pages yellowed. I flipped through it. It contained names, dates, license plate numbers, and bank account routing codes. It was 10 years of listening. 10 years of drivers talking. 10 years of secrets that could topple senators and destroy CEOs. I picked up the satellite phone. The battery was dead, but I had a charger. I plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, searching for a signal. Bradley thought he was fighting a barber. He thought he was fighting a lonely old man protecting a rundown building. He didn't know he had just declared war on the keeper of secrets. I sat on the floor of the storage room, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. I wasn't Cedric the barber anymore. I was Special Agent McNeil, and I was coming out of retirement. The war against my barbershop did not begin with guns or bombs. It began with clipboards. 3 days after I threatened Julian Thorne, the city of Washington, D.C. decided that Fade and Soul was public enemy number 1. At 8 in the morning, a health inspector I had never seen before claimed he found rodent droppings in the storage room. At 10, the fire marshal declared my electrical wiring was a catastrophic hazard, despite the fact that I had it rewired by a certified union electrician last year. By noon, a tax auditor was demanding 7 years of receipts for every bottle of shampoo I had ever purchased. They slapped a bright orange sticker on my front window. Condemned. Closed for business until further notice. I stood on the sidewalk and watched them lock my livelihood away. My neighbors watched with pity in their eyes. They saw a helpless old man being crushed by the bureaucracy. They didn't see what I saw. I saw a desperate enemy firing all his ammunition at once. Bradley was trying to suffocate me. He thought if he cut off my income, I would come crawling to him begging to sell the land for pennies just to buy groceries. I didn't argue with the inspectors. I didn't yell. I simply nodded, took my coat, and locked the door. When you are an operative, you know that when the front door is kicked in, you go out the window. I wasn't going to fight him in the courtroom. I was going to fight him in the streets. I adjusted my flat cap and started walking. To anyone passing by, I was just an old pensioner taking a stroll to kill time. But I was working. The streets of D.C. have eyes and ears, and for 40 years I have been paying attention to them. My first stop was a park bench 3 blocks away near the metro station. A man was sleeping there under a pile of newspapers, a ragged cup in front of him. His name was Jerome. Most people stepped over him like he was trash. But Jerome was a Vietnam vet with a memory that could shame a supercomputer. He saw every car that parked on this block. He saw every face that went into the high-rise office building across the street, the building where Bradley Sterling had his headquarters. I sat down next to him. I didn't look at him. I just opened a brown paper bag and pulled out 2 turkey sandwiches. I placed one next to his cup. Jerome didn't open his eyes, but his hand moved like lightning to grab the sandwich. "The suit who came to my shop," I said softly, looking at the pigeons pecking at crumbs. "Thorne. Does he come here often?" Jerome took a bite, chewing slowly. "Thorne is a runner." Jerome rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "He runs errands for the big man. But the big man Sterling, he has been having late nights. Very late nights." "Tell me," I said. "Black SUVs," Jerome continued. "Not American government plates. Diplomatic plates. But not the friendly kind. Eastern European. They come at 2 in the morning. They leave at 4 with briefcases. Heavy briefcases. And Sterling. He looks like a man walking to the gallows. He is sweating even when it is freezing outside." I slid a $20 bill under the sandwich wrapper. Jerome made it disappear instantly. I stood up and continued my walk. Diplomatic plates. Late-night cash drops. This wasn't just a real estate deal. This was a liquidity crisis. I walked 4 more blocks to a newsstand on the corner of K Street. Mrs. Higgins was sitting behind the counter, surrounded by glossy magazines and candy bars. She had been selling papers here since Nixon was in office. She knew the rhythm of this city better than the mayor. "Afternoon, Mac." She set her eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Heard the city shut you down. Those bastards." "News travels fast," I said, picking up a copy of the Financial Times. "I need to know about the building project, Martha. The one Sterling keeps bragging about." Mrs. Higgins snorted. She leaned over the counter, lowering her voice. "There is no Project Mac. I sell papers to the clerks at the zoning office. They say Sterling has not filed a single permit for a high-rise. Not one blueprint. Not one environmental impact study." I felt a chill run down my spine. If there were no permits, then the architectural drawing Thorne showed me was a prop, a fake. So why does he want my land so badly, I asked, more to myself than to her. "Because of the bank," Mrs. Higgins whispered. "The manager of the City First Bank comes here for his cigars. He was on his phone yesterday screaming at someone. He said he needed collateral, tangible assets. He said the Sterling accounts were mostly smoke and mirrors. He gave them 48 hours to post real property or he was calling the loan." The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a terrifying sound. It wasn't about development. It wasn't about gentrification. Bradley Sterling was broke. His flashy fintech company was bleeding money, probably to pay off the men in the black SUVs Jerome saw. He needed my land not to build, but to mortgage. He needed to show the bank he owned prime real estate in D.C. so they would extend his line of credit for another week. Just enough time to keep the Ponzi scheme spinning. My barbershop was the life raft he was trying to steal because his yacht was sinking. I thanked Mrs. Higgins and bought a pack of gum I didn't need. I walked back toward my neighborhood, my mind racing. Bradley wasn't just a greedy developer. He was a cornered animal. And a cornered animal is unpredictable. He didn't care about my history. He didn't care about Esther. He only cared that I was the one obstacle standing between him and prison, or worse, between him and the people who owned those black SUVs. I stopped in front of my closed shop. The orange sticker seemed to mock me. I touched the glass. "You made a mistake, Bradley," I whispered to the empty street. "You thought you were evicting an old man, but you just invited the FBI into your living room." I turned around and headed for the subway. I wasn't going home. I needed to go to the library. I needed a secure terminal. I needed to see exactly how deep the hole was that my son-in-law had dug for himself. And then I was going to help him fall into it. The rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets of D.C. and turned the neon signs into blurry streaks of light. I sat in my darkened barber shop, the only illumination coming from the street lamp outside and the glowing screen of the satellite phone in my hand. I was reviewing the data I had pulled from the public records, trying to find the weak link in Bradley's armor. I thought I had him cornered with the liquidity crisis. I thought I was squeezing him for money. I was wrong. I was only seeing the tip of the iceberg. A frantic pounding on the glass door shattered my concentration. I dropped the phone into my pocket and grabbed the revolver from the counter, holding it behind my back. You don't survive 30 years in federal law enforcement by opening doors without insurance. I moved to the window and peered through the blinds. It was Maya. My heart stopped. My daughter, who usually looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine, looked like a ghost. Her hair was plastered to her skull by the rain. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin blouse that was soaked through. She was shivering violently, pounding on the glass with both fists, her mouth open in a silent scream. I unlocked the door and threw it open. She collapsed into my arms, smelling of rain and terror. "Daddy," she sobbed, her voice breaking into jagged pieces. "Daddy, please." I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I pulled her inside and locked the door. I guided her to the nearest barber chair and wrapped a dry towel around her shoulders. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. I went to the back and poured a shot of whiskey into a paper cup. "Drink," I ordered. She drank it in one gulp, coughing as it went down. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivers. I knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in mine. "Talk to me, baby girl," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "What happened? Did he hit you?" She shook her head frantically. No, he didn't hit me. It is worse. Daddy, I think I am going to prison." The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Prison. I felt the old instinct kick in, the cold detachment that allows an agent to analyze a disaster while it is happening. "Why would you go to prison, Maya?" I asked. She reached into her soaked purse and pulled out a crumpled manila envelope. She thrust it at me like it was burning her hands. "I found these in his study," she whispered. "He was drunk. He left the safe open. I saw my name on the files. Daddy, why is my name on everything?" I took the envelope and moved to the counter, switching on a small lamp. I pulled out the documents. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, the fine print, the signatures. It took me less than 30 seconds to understand the magnitude of what I was looking at. And in that 30 seconds, my hatred for Bradley Sterling transformed from personal distaste into a lethal professional resolve. These weren't just loan documents. These were articles of incorporation for 3 different shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. Companies that were currently holding millions of dollars in toxic debt. Companies that were being used to launder money for the cartels I used to hunt. And on the bottom of every single page on the line designated for the chief executive officer and primary liable party was a signature. Maya Sterling. "He made me sign them," Maya cried from the chair. "He brought them to me months ago. He said it was just for tax purposes. He said since he was the face of the company, he needed me to hold the assets in my name to protect our family. He said it was standard procedure. He said if I loved him, I would trust him." I looked at her signature. It was shaky, hesitant. She had signed her life away because she wanted to be a good wife. I flipped to the next page. It was a loan agreement with a private equity firm in Moscow. The collateral wasn't the house. It wasn't the car. It was Maya's personal liability. My hands clenched around the paper, crumbling the edge. Bradley wasn't just using her. He was setting her up. He knew the house of cards was falling. He knew the FBI or the IRS would come knocking eventually. And when they did, he had built a trapdoor. He would claim he was just an employee, a consultant, while his wife, the CEO on paper, had orchestrated the fraud. He was going to send the mother of his children to federal prison for 20 years so he could walk away clean. I looked back at Maya. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. In the eyes of the law, she was the prime suspect in a massive international money laundering scheme. If I went to the police now, if I handed this over to my old colleagues, they would arrest her. The evidence was too perfect. Bradley had been planning this exit strategy since the day he proposed to her. "Daddy," she whimpered. "He told me tonight that if the bank calls the loan on the building project, the defaults trigger automatically. He said I might have to go away for a while. He said I have to take the fall for the family." I walked back to her. I didn't hug her. I didn't cry. This was not the time for a father's grief. This was the time for a handler's instruction. "Listen to me, Maya," I said, my voice hard as steel. "You are going to stop crying, right now." She sniffled, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You are going to go back to that house," I continued. You are going to put these papers exactly where you found them. You are going to wipe your eyes, fix your makeup, and pour yourself a glass of wine. You are going to walk into the bedroom and kiss that son of a bitch on the cheek and tell him you are sorry for overreacting. But Daddy, I can't. You can and you will, I interrupted. Because if he suspects that you know the truth, if he suspects that you have shown these papers to anyone, he will run. And if he runs, he leaves you holding the bag. Do you understand me? She nodded slowly. You are not the suspect, Maya. You are the hostage. And I do not lose hostages. I stood up and pulled her to her feet. I buttoned her blouse. I smoothed her hair. Go home, I said. Act like the wife he thinks he owns. Give me 24 hours. She looked at me, searching for the father who used to check under her bed for monsters. She found him, but he was wearing a different face. What are you going to do, Mac? She asked, using my nickname for the first time since she was a child. I am going to give Bradley exactly what he wants, I said. I am going to give him a clean shave. I watched her run back into the rain, getting into her car and driving away. As soon as her taillights disappeared, I locked the door and walked back to the storage room. I didn't need to look at the papers again. I had the account numbers memorized. I sat down on the floor next to the safe and picked up the satellite phone. Bradley Sterling was a criminal, yes, but he was an amateur. He thought he could use the legal system as a weapon. He didn't know that I helped build that system. He thought he could sacrifice my blood to save his skin. I dialed a number that hadn't been active since the late 90s. It was a direct line to a specialized tactical unit within the Bureau, a unit that didn't exist on any organizational chart. The line clicked open, no greeting, just breathing on the other end. This is Agent McNeil, I said into the darkness. Authorization code Zulu 40, I am activating Operation Clean Shave. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Target, the voice asked. Bradley Sterling, I replied. And I don't just want him arrested. I want him erased. I want his assets frozen, his passport flagged, and his digital footprint tracked. But do not move until I give the signal. He has a civilian shield. Copy that, McNeil. Welcome back. I hung up the phone. The storm outside was raging, battering the old brick walls of my shop. But inside, everything was calm. I had a daughter to save. I had a monster to slay. And for the first time in years, I felt completely alive. Bradley wanted to play games with titles and deeds. Fine, I was about to show him that the most dangerous man in the world isn't the one with the loudest title. It is the father with nothing left to lose. They didn't come with a polite knock. They came with the kind of force reserved for domestic terrorists and cartel leaders. It was 3 a.m. when the front window of Fade and Soul exploded inward. I was sitting in the back room awake, drinking cold coffee and waiting. I knew Bradley wouldn't stop at threats. I knew he needed to discredit me before I could use the files I had found in his safe. But I didn't expect him to be this sloppy. Glass shattered across the checkerboard floor like ice. Then came the flashbangs. A blinding white light filled the shop, followed by a deafening boom that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. I didn't flinch. I didn't dive for cover. I simply set my coffee cup down on the table and raised my hands. When the tactical team breached the door, screaming for me to get on the ground, they found an old man in a cardigan sitting calmly in a folding chair. "Get down, police! Get on the ground now!" 4 men in full riot gear pointed assault rifles at my chest. I lowered myself slowly to the floor, careful of my bad knee. I interlocked my fingers behind my head. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask what was happening. I let them play their part in the theater Bradley had paid for. The lead officer, a man with a thick neck and eyes that darted around too quickly, didn't check the perimeter. He didn't clear the back exit. He walked straight to the main floor of the barber shop. He walked directly to chair number 2, the vintage Koken chair I had restored myself. He pulled a knife from his vest and slashed the red vinyl seat cushion open. He reached inside and pulled out a brick-sized package wrapped in duct tape. He held it up for his body camera to see. "We have a positive," he yelled. "Looks like a kilo of heroin." Secure the suspect, I watched from the floor, my face pressed against the cold linoleum. It was a lazy plant, too obvious. No dealer in his right mind hides a kilo of product in the seat cushion of a chair he uses every day. It disrupts the springs. Customers would feel the lump. But logic doesn't matter when the outcome has already been purchased. They hauled me up, wrenching my arms behind my back. The handcuffs bit into my wrists. They were tight, designed to cause pain, designed to make me feel small. They dragged me out through the broken front window and onto the sidewalk. The neighborhood was awake. The flashing blue and red lights painted the brick buildings in a chaotic strobe. Mrs. Higgins was standing on the corner in her bathrobe, her hand over her mouth. Jerome was there too, watching from the shadows of the alley, his eyes wide with confusion. They were seeing their friend, the man who cut their children's hair, being paraded like a kingpin. This is what Bradley wanted. He didn't just want me in jail. He wanted to kill my reputation. He wanted to strip me of the one thing he couldn't buy, my dignity. As they shoved me toward the back of the squad car, I saw it. Parked across the street, half hidden by the darkness, was a sleek black sedan. The window rolled down just an inch. Even from this distance, I could see the glow of a cigar. And then a face. Bradley Sterling. He was watching. He was smiling. It was a tight, triumphant smirk. He raised a glass of whiskey and a mock toast. He thought he had won. He thought he had just removed the only obstacle in his path. He thought seeing me in cuffs would break me. I stopped walking. The officer shoved me, but I planted my feet. I looked directly at the black sedan. I didn't look angry. I didn't look afraid. I looked at him with the cold, dead stare of a man who is memorizing a face for later. "Move it, Grandpa," the officer barked, slamming my head down to clear the door frame as he threw me into the back seat. The door slammed shut, sealing me in the cage. The smell of stale vomit and disinfectant filled my nose. I leaned back against the hard plastic seat. My heart rate was 60 beats per minute. Steady. I looked at the officer driving the car. I looked at his name tag in the rearview mirror. Officer Miller, badge number 4922. I looked at his partner. Officer Davis, badge number 3180. I closed my eyes and filed those numbers away in the cabinet of my mind. I filed away the lack of a warrant. I filed away the direct path to the drugs. I filed away the black sedan across the street. Bradley thought he was sending me to hell. He didn't realize he was doing me a favor. I needed to get into the system. I needed to get inside the precinct to access the secure network that I couldn't reach from the outside. I needed to be exactly where he was sending me. As the siren wailed and the car lurched forward, taking me away from my home and my life, I allowed myself a small, private smile. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, son," I whispered to the empty air. "You didn't just arrest a barber. You just gave a wolf a ride to the henhouse. And I am very, very hungry." The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and fear. It is a scent I know well. I spent 30 years on the other side of this metal table, breaking men who were smarter, tougher, and richer than Detective Miller. But Miller didn't know that. To him, I was just a statistic. Another old black man from the wrong side of D.C. caught with a brick of heroin. He saw a quick conviction. He saw a bonus. He saw the envelope of cash Bradley Sterling had likely slipped into his pocket earlier that evening. Miller walked in, slamming a thick file folder onto the steel table. The sound echoed off the cinderblock walls. He didn't sit down. He paced behind me, letting the silence stretch out. It is a rookie tactic. The idea is to make the suspect nervous, to make them fill the silence with a confession. I sat perfectly still. I focused on my breathing. I counted the flicker of the fluorescent light above us. "You are looking at 20 years, Mac Miller said, finally leaning against the wall. "Mandatory minimums. At your age, that is a death sentence. You will die in a cage surrounded by strangers who won't care about your arthritis or your bad back." I didn't respond. I looked at the two-way mirror to my left. I knew exactly who was watching from the other side. The captain. Maybe the district attorney. They were waiting for the slam dunk. Miller pulled a chair out and sat across from me. He leaned in, his breath smelling of peppermint and tobacco. "Look, I get it," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Times are tough. The barbershop isn't making money. You wanted a little nest egg. Maybe you didn't know what was in the package. Maybe you were just holding it for someone. If you give us a name, Mac, I can talk to the DA. We can work something out. Maybe house arrest, maybe probation." He pushed a pen and a waiver form toward me. "Just sign this. Waive your right to counsel. Tell us who gave you the package." I looked at the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint. Then I looked at Miller's wrist. He was wearing a Rolex Submariner, a $10,000 watch on a detective's salary. Bradley hadn't just tipped him. He had bought him. I leaned back in my chair, the metal handcuffs digging into my spine. "Is that a new watch, Detective?" I asked calmly. Miller blinked, pulling his sleeve down instinctively. "Focus, Mac. We are talking about your life here. Your son-in-law, Mr. Sterling, is very worried about you. He called the captain personally. He said he had suspicions you were mixed up with the wrong crowd. He is heartbroken." I almost laughed. Heartbroken. Bradley was probably popping champagne right now. He is worried about your daughter, too, Miller continued, pressing harder. If you go down for this, and if we find out she knew about the drugs in the shop, well, Maya could be looking at accessory charges. You don't want to drag your little girl into this, do you? That was the trigger. He threatened my child. In the old days, I would have reached across the table and broken his nose before he could blink. But I am not that man anymore. I am something more dangerous. I am a man with a plan. I sat up straight. The old man posture vanished. My shoulders squared. My eyes locked onto Miller's, and for the first time he flinched. He saw the shift. He saw the prey become the predator. I don't need a lawyer, detective, I said, my voice filling the small room. Miller smiled, relieved. Smart move. So you are ready to confess? No, I continued. I am ready to make my phone call. Miller frowned. You can call your lawyer or a family member. Who do you want to call Maya? I recited a number. Area code 202. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't Maya. It was a number that hadn't been in the public directory since 1999. Miller paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. Who is that, a bail bondsman? Just dial the number, Miller. Unless you want to explain to your captain why you denied a suspect his constitutional rights while wearing a watch, you can't explain on your tax return. Miller's face turned red. He snatched the receiver of the landline on the wall and punched in the numbers aggressively. He held the phone out to me, sneering. Make it quick, Grandpa, then you are going to a holding cell. I took the receiver with my cuffed hands. I held it to my ear. It rang once, twice, then a click. Director's office, a woman's voice answered. Crisp, professional. This is Agent Cedric McNeil, I said clearly. Service number 884-Zulu-Tango. I am currently being held at the 4th Precinct under false pretenses. I need to speak with Director Vance. Immediately. Miller let out a bark of laughter. He reached out to snatch the phone away. Okay, that is enough. Agent, you are hallucinating. Give me the phone. I didn't let go. I stared at him. Detective? I said, my voice low and lethal. You are holding a pawn, but you are playing on a king's board. Check my military service record before you hit that record button. Miller froze. His hand hovered inches from the disconnect switch. Something in my voice, something in the absolute certainty of my tone made him hesitate. Doubt is a powerful thing. It crept into his eyes. On the phone, the line went silent for 3 seconds. Then a deep, familiar voice came on the line. A voice I hadn't heard in 5 years, but one that still commanded respect across the entire intelligence community. Mac, is that you? Hello, Vance, I said, keeping my eyes on Miller. I hope I didn't wake you. But we have a situation, and I think Detective Miller here is about to make a career-ending mistake. Miller's arrogance evaporated. He looked at the phone, then at me, then at the two-way mirror. He realized too late that the old barber he tried to bully was the one man in the room he should have feared. Put him on speaker, Mac Director Vance ordered. I hit the speaker button and set the receiver on the table. Detective Miller Vance's voice boomed through the small room. This is Director Vance of the FBI. You have exactly 10 seconds to uncuff Agent McNeil and step away from the table, or I will have federal marshals at your precinct within the hour, and they will not be coming to talk. They will be coming to audit your evidence locker. Miller turned pale. He looked like he was going to be sick. The door to the interrogation room burst open. The police captain rushed in looking terrified. "Unlock him!" the captain yelled at Miller. "Unlock him now!" Miller fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. As the cuffs clicked open and fell from my wrists, I rubbed the red marks on my skin. I stood up, towering over the sitting detective. I picked up the file folder Miller had slammed down earlier. I tossed it into the trash can in the corner. "We aren't done, Miller," I whispered as I walked past him. "We are just getting started, but next time bring a better watch." I walked out of the interrogation room and into the precinct hallway. The captain was apologizing profusely, wiping sweat from his forehead. I ignored him. I had work to do. Bradley Sterling had fired his shot. Now it was my turn to return fire, and I wasn't going to miss. The chaos in the precinct was almost comical. 10 minutes ago, I was a dirty old man with a brick of heroin. Now I was a radioactive isotope that no one wanted to touch. I stood near the front desk, rubbing my wrists where the handcuffs had been, watching the captain scream at his computer monitor. He was trying to access my arrest record to delete it, to scrub the mistake before it ended his career. But he couldn't. Access denied. The words flashed in angry red letters on his screen. Every time he tried to type my name, the system locked him out. He looked up at me, sweat dripping down his pale face. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Who are you?" I didn't answer. I just checked the time on the wall clock. 3 minutes. That was the response time for a level 1 extraction. Right on cue, the double doors of the precinct swung open. The room went silent. A man walked in who made the local detectives look like mall security guards. He wore a navy blue suit that was tailored to conceal a shoulder holster. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a man who has spent his life hunting in the shadows. Agent Henderson. He was young enough to be my son, but his eyes were old. He had been my protege 10 years ago. Now he was the handler for the Financial Crimes Task Force. He didn't look at the captain. He didn't look at Detective Miller, who was shrinking into the corner. He walked straight to me. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. This wasn't a social call. This was an operation. "Secure the room," Henderson ordered. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of federal authority. 2 other agents in plain clothes stepped in behind him, blocking the doors. The captain stammered. "Sir, we were just processing the suspect." "There is no suspect," Henderson cut him off, handing the captain a piece of paper. "This is a transfer order from the Department of Justice. Mr. McNeil is now in federal custody. All local records regarding this incident are classified top secret. If you speak about this night to anyone, including your wife, you will be facing a federal grand jury for obstruction of justice. Do I make myself clear?" The captain nodded rapidly, looking like he might faint. Henderson turned to me. "Let's walk, Mac." We walked out of the precinct and into the cool night air. A black SUV with tinted windows was waiting at the curb. We got in the back. As soon as the doors closed, sealing us in a soundproof bubble, the mask dropped. Henderson let out a long breath and looked at me with a mixture of admiration and annoyance. "You cut it close, Mac," he said, handing me a bottle of water. We picked up the chatter on the police scanner. "Sterling planted a kilo. That is sloppy." "It was desperate," I corrected, taking a sip of water. "He is panicking. He needed me off the board tonight because he is moving the money tomorrow." Henderson opened his laptop. "We have a problem, Mac. We know he is moving the money. We have the wiretap logs. But we can't move on him yet. The evidence you found in his safe, it is fruit of the poisonous tree. You obtained it without a warrant. If we use it in court, his lawyers will tear it apart. We need a clean entry." I smiled, leaning back against the leather seat. I watched the city lights blur past the window. "That is exactly why I let him arrest me," I said softly. Henderson stopped typing. He looked at me, confusion knitting his brow. "Think about it," I explained. "Bradley planted drugs in my shop. He paid off a detective to frame me. That is a federal crime. By setting me up, he just gave you the probable cause you needed. You don't need the papers from his safe to get a warrant anymore. You have the corruption at the precinct. You have the false police report. You have the planted evidence." I tapped the side of my head. "He opened the door for us, Henderson. I am now a victim of a malicious prosecution orchestrated by a target of a federal investigation. That gives you legal standing to seize his communications. It gives you the right to audit his connection to the police. And once you pull that thread, the whole sweater unravels." Henderson stared at me for a moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. "You old fox," he muttered. "You used yourself as bait." "I am not bait," I said, looking at the reflection of my tired eyes in the window. "I am the hook. Bradley Sterling thinks he flushed me down the toilet. He thinks I am rotting in a cell right now. He is going to feel safe. He is going to get careless." "So what is the play?" Henderson asked. I pulled the black notebook from my jacket pocket. The police hadn't even bothered to search me properly. They were too focused on the planted drugs. "Drop me off 2 blocks from my shop," I said. "I need to disappear for 24 hours. Let Bradley think he won. Let him throw his victory party." And then Henderson asked. And then I said, clutching the notebook tight, "I am going to attend a gala. I hear the hors d'oeuvres are excellent." The SUV turned a corner, disappearing into the traffic. To the world, Cedric McNeil was a disgraced barber. But in the encrypted servers of the FBI was now the primary asset in the biggest money laundering case of the decade. Bradley had tried to bury me, but he forgot one crucial rule of gardening. When you bury a seed, it grows. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon when I walked back into my neighborhood. The air tasted of exhaust fumes and fresh pastries from the bakery down the street, a smell that had never been as sweet as it was in that moment of freedom. My wrists still ached from the handcuffs, a dull, throbbing reminder of the night's theater, but my mind was sharper than it had been in 20 years. I didn't sneak back into Fade and Soul. I walked right up to the front door. the glass still shattered on the sidewalk, glittering like diamonds in the morning light. I unlocked the door, swept the glass aside with my boot, and flipped the sign in the window. Open. It was a message, not to customers, but to him. 20 minutes later, a black sedan screeched to a halt across the street. It was the same car from the night before. The window rolled down and I saw Bradley Sterling. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. He had spent thousands of dollars to frame me burned political favors to get me arrested, and yet here I was sweeping my floor as if nothing had happened. I stopped sweeping. I leaned on my broom and looked directly at him. I raised my hand in a small, polite wave. Bradley turned purple. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, screaming something I couldn't hear before the car peeled away, tires smoking against the asphalt. He was scared. Good. Fear makes men make mistakes. Fear makes them loud. And Bradley got very loud. By noon, the attacks shifted from physical to psychological. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. It was short, terrified. He knows you are out. He took my car keys. He says if I talk to you, he will call Child Protective Services and tell them I am unstable. Daddy, please be careful. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I didn't text back. I couldn't risk him seeing it. But the rage that ignited in my chest was cold and focused. He was using my grandchild and my daughter as leverage. He was trying to isolate me, to cut off my heart so my head would stop working. He didn't understand that he had just severed the last thread of mercy I might have had for him. At 2 o'clock, the media circus arrived. But not for me. I turned on the small television in the corner of the shop. Every local news channel was broadcasting live from the steps of City Hall. There was Bradley standing behind a podium adorned with the Sterling Horizons logo. He looked impeccable in a navy suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, a sad, serious expression on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "It breaks my heart to stand here today. We had a vision for this city, a vision of progress, a vision of jobs, but there are forces that want to hold us back. Old, archaic forces that cling to the past and refuse to let the future in." The camera cut to a B-roll footage of my barbershop zooming in on the broken window and the police tape that was still fluttering in the wind. "My father-in-law, Cedric McNeil, is a troubled man," Bradley continued, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "We have tried to help him. We have offered him support. But his recent legal troubles and his refusal to accept mental health treatment have made it impossible for us to move forward with the community center we plan to build on that corner." Community center. He was calling it a community center now. Yesterday it was luxury condos. The man could spin a lie faster than a spider spins a web. He paused for effect, looking directly into the camera lens. "So, it is with a heavy heart that I announce we are launching a public petition to rezone the 8th Street corridor as a blighted area. We need the city's help to save these neighborhoods from decay and criminal activity. We cannot let one man's personal demons stop progress for thousands." The crowd of paid supporters cheered. The reporters scribbled furiously. He was painting a masterpiece of manipulation. He wasn't just attacking me, he was turning the entire city against me. He was making me the villain in his hero's journey. I turned off the TV. The silence in the shop was heavy. "You want a war of narratives, Bradley?" I whispered. "Fine. You keep talking to the cameras. I will talk to the numbers." I locked the front door again. I went to the back room and pulled the heavy velvet curtain across the entrance. I sat down at my desk, pushing aside the combs and scissors to make room for the laptop Agent Henderson had provided. It was a ruggedized field unit connected directly to the Bureau's forensic servers. Forensic accounting is not about addition and subtraction. It is about storytelling. Money tells a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Honest money moves in straight lines, income tax, expense, profit. But dirty money dances. It loops and spirals, trying to hide its origin. My job was to untangle the knot. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. I started with the shell companies Maya had found: Aurora Holdings, Bluestone Ventures, Omega Capital. I pulled their transaction histories. At first glance, they looked legitimate. Consulting fees, software licensing, real estate acquisitions. But when you looked closer, the rhythm was off. Why would a software company in D.C. pay Pay $5 million in consulting fees to a firm in Cyprus that had no website and no employees. Why would a real estate venture pay $2 million a month for logistical support to a trucking company in Mexico that owned no trucks? I traced the wire transfers. It was like following a single drop of blood through a rushing river. Bradley was moving money fast, bouncing it through 4 or 5 jurisdictions in a matter of hours. This is called layering. It is designed to dizzy the auditor to make them give up in frustration. But I don't get frustrated. I get curious. I followed a transfer of $10 million that left Bradley's main account 3 days ago. It went to a bank in Switzerland, then to a trust in the Cayman Islands, then to a shell company in Delaware, and finally, I froze. The money didn't disappear. It landed. It landed in an account marked Project Phoenix. I dug deeper into Project Phoenix. It wasn't an offshore account. It was a domestic account, a construction escrow account held at a mid-sized bank in Virginia. Why would a money launderer bring the money back into the United States? I pulled the details of the account holder. The name listed wasn't Bradley Sterling, it wasn't Maya. It was a limited liability company called Sterling Future. I cross-referenced the LLC's address. It matched an empty warehouse in the industrial district. Then I saw the withdrawal requests. Every Friday, $50,000 in cash was being withdrawn from this account. Cash, not wire transfers. Cash. Who withdraws $50,000 a week in cash? Construction crews. No, they use payroll checks. Suppliers. No, they use invoices. There is only one industry that demands that kind of cash volume on a weekly schedule. Bribes. Bradley wasn't just laundering money for the cartels. He was using the washed money to pay off someone in D.C., someone powerful. Someone who could rezone a neighborhood, overlook building permits, and maybe even influence a police captain to arrest an innocent barber. I leaned back in my chair, the screen glow illuminating the smile that was slowly spreading across my face. I had him. I didn't just have the financial crime, I had the political corruption. This wasn't just a Ponzi scheme anymore. This was a RICO case. I picked up the satellite phone. "Henderson," I said when he answered. "Yeah, Mac, I found the leak," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Bradley isn't just a thief, he is a bag man. I found a domestic slush fund. He is paying someone off in cash, weekly drops. Can you identify the recipient?" Henderson asked, his voice tightening with excitement. "Not from the computer," I said. "I need to see who picks up the cash. We can set up surveillance on the bank," Henderson suggested. "No," I countered. "If he sees a van, he will spook. He knows you are watching him now. He thinks I am just a nuisance. He thinks I am playing checkers while he is playing chess. So what is the plan?" "Mac." I stood up and looked at the photo of Esther on the wall. "He is going to make a withdrawal tomorrow," I said. "It is Friday. I am going to be there. Not as an agent. Not as a barber. As what I looked down at my hands, the hands that had held a gun as often as they had held a razor. As a ghost, I said, I am going to follow the money, Henderson. And when it lands, I want you to be ready to catch the man who catches it." I hung up the phone. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my shop. Bradley Sterling was on every TV screen in the city, smiling his fake smile, thinking he was the king of the world. He didn't know that the castle he built was made of paper, and I had just lit the match. I went to the closet and pulled out a nondescript gray windbreaker and a baseball cap. I wasn't Cedric McNeil tonight. I was nobody. And nobody is the most dangerous person in the room. The back room of Fate and Soul looked like a graveyard for 1990s technology. To anyone who walked in, it was just a pile of beige computer towers and heavy CRT monitors stacked on milk crates covered in a fine layer of barbershop dust. But that was the point. Camouflage is not about being invisible. It is about being boring. Nobody looks twice at a junk pile. They do not know that inside those dusty casings I had installed processors powerful enough to mine cryptocurrency, or in my case, crack the encryption of a corrupt fintech empire. I sat in the dark, the blue glow of the screens illuminating the deep lines on my face. My fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking the only sound in the silent shop. I was not Cedric the Barber tonight. I was Agent McNeil, and I was hunting. I was inside Bradley's private ledger. It wasn't easy. He had layers of security firewalls bought with stolen money and passwords that changed every hour. But Bradley made the classic mistake of arrogance. He assumed his enemies would come from the outside, hacking through the front door. He never expected someone to have the physical key, the admin codes I had lifted from the documents Maya found. I watched the numbers scroll down the screen like a waterfall of green code. It was beautiful in a sick, twisted way, the flow of money. It tells a story better than any confession. And the story on my screen was terrifying. $50 million. That was the sum Bradley was moving tonight. But he wasn't sending it to the Cayman Islands this time. That channel was burned. He was sending it to a new entity, the Heritage Foundation for Underprivileged Youth, a charity. I scoffed, the sound harsh in the empty room. A charity. It is the oldest trick in the book. You set up a non-profit, you donate $50 million of dirty money, you get a tax write-off, and then the charity pays out consulting fees to your shell companies overseas. It is washing money in holy water. I typed, furiously tracing the IP address of this so-called charity. It routed through a server farm in Estonia, then bounced to a satellite in Singapore before landing right back here in DC. I leaned closer to the screen. The registered address for the charity was a P.O. box in Georgetown, the same P.O. box used by a known lobbyist for the arms industry. "Got you," I whispered. I raised my hand to hit the enter key to download the transaction log that would send Bradley to federal prison for the rest of his life. But before my finger could strike the key, the screen flashed red. Intrusion detected. Trace initiated. I froze. A countermeasure. Bradley had hired a cybersecurity firm, likely ex-Mossad or NSA, to watch the vault. They had seen me. And worse, they were tracing the signal back to the shop. I had seconds. I didn't try to disconnect. If I pulled the plug now, I would lose the data. I had to finish the download. "Come on," I growled, watching the progress bar crawl. 80%, 85. My phone buzzed. It was Henderson. "Mac, get out of there. We just picked up a ping. Sterling's security team knows you are online. They are sending a cleanup crew." "I know," I said calmly. "I am almost done. Mac, listen to me. These aren't lawyers." We picked up chatter on a burner channel. He sent the twins, the Novak brothers. "They are hitmen, Mac. Get out, the Novak brothers." I knew the name. Eastern European muscle. They didn't ask questions. They just broke bones until the problem stopped moving. The download hit 100%. I yanked the flash drive from the port. I didn't have time to wipe the drive. I grabbed a heavy magnet I kept on the desk, an old woofer from a speaker, and slammed it onto the hard drive tower. The screen flickered and died. The data on the computer was fried, but I had what I needed in my pocket. Then I heard it. The sound of a car engine idling outside. The heavy thud of doors closing. I didn't run. I am 71 years old with a bad knee. I don't run. I slipped the flash drive into the hollow heel of my left shoe. I sat down in my swivel chair and turned it to face the door. I picked up my cane. It was hickory solid and heavy. The back door to the alley didn't open. It exploded. Wood splinters flew through the air as a boot kicked the lock mechanism apart. Two men stepped into the dim light. They were massive, wearing expensive suits that strained against their steroid-fueled muscles. They had dead eyes. One of them, the taller one with a scar running through his eyebrow, stepped forward. He looked around the dusty room, sneering at the old computers. "Mr. McNeil," he said. His voice was thick with a Russian accent. "Mr. Sterling sends his regards." I stayed seated, my hands resting on the cane. "Tell Bradley his customer service needs work," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You didn't even knock." The scarred man didn't laugh. He walked toward me. "This wasn't a negotiation. We are here to deliver a message," he said. "Stop looking, stop digging, or next time we visit your daughter." He moved faster than a man his size should. He backhanded me across the face. The force of the blow knocked me out of the chair. I tasted copper. My glasses skittered across the floor. I lay on the linoleum, wheezing. My ribs burned. I looked up at him. "Is that it?" I rasped, spitting blood onto the floor. "I thought you were professionals." The second man stepped forward and kicked me in the stomach. I curled up, gasping for air. Pain exploded in my gut. "Stay down, old man," the scarred one said. He pulled a gun from his holster. He didn't point it at me. He pointed it at the computer tower. He fired 3 shots. Bam! 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 The beige box disintegrated. He thought he had destroyed the evidence. He thought he had destroyed the machine. He didn't know the machine was just a shell. "Consider this a warning," he said, looming over me. "If you go near a computer again, if you go near the bank again, the next bullet goes in your head." They turned and walked out, leaving me lying in the debris of my own shop. The cold wind from the broken door blew over me. I lay there for a minute, letting the pain wash over me. I catalogued the injuries. Bruised ribs, split lip, nothing broken, nothing I hadn't felt before. I slowly rolled onto my side. I reached for my glasses. One lens was cracked. I put them on anyway. I pulled myself up using the desk for support. I wiped the blood from my mouth with the back of my hand. I looked at the destroyed computer. I looked at the empty doorway. I reached down and tapped the heel of my left shoe. "You should have checked the shoes, boys," I whispered into the silence. I wasn't afraid. The fear had vanished the moment they mentioned my daughter. Now there was only cold, hard determination. Bradley had escalated the game to violence. He thought violence would silence me. He forgot that I was forged in violence. I limped to the front of the shop. I needed ice. I needed tape for my ribs. And then I needed to go to the bank. Bradley Sterling had just made the fatal mistake of letting me live. And tomorrow he was going to learn that an old barber with a cracked rib and a flash drive is more dangerous than an army of hitmen. The smell of gasoline is something you never forget. It cuts through the scent of bay rum and talcum powder like a knife. I was sitting in the dark of the shop, nursing my bruised ribs with a bag of frozen peas, when I heard the glass shatter. It wasn't the sharp crack of a rock. It was the heavy, wet thud of a bottle, followed immediately by the whoosh of ignition. The front window, the one with the gold lettering that said Fade and Soul, dissolved into a wall of orange flame. The heat was instantaneous. It punched me in the face, searing my eyebrows and sucking the oxygen right out of the room. Fire moves faster than people think. In movies, you have time to grab your photo albums and your cat. In real life, you have seconds before the smoke drops you to your knees. I didn't panic. Panic burns oxygen. I rolled off the chair, hitting the floor hard. My ribs screamed in protest, a sharp, jagged pain that nearly made me black out, but I forced myself to crawl. I kept my face an inch from the linoleum where the air was still breathable. The fire was hungry. It was eating the red vinyl chairs. It was climbing the walls toward the picture of Esther. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and fight the fire with my bare hands to save her face from the flames. But I knew that if I stood up, I died. And if I died, Bradley won. I crawled toward the back door. The heat was blistering now. The varnish on the wood floor was bubbling. I reached the heavy steel door and grabbed the handle. It was hot. I used my jacket to turn it. Locked. The heat had warped the frame. I coughed, my lungs filling with black smoke. I had one shot. I pulled myself up, bracing my good shoulder against the wall, and kicked the release bar with everything I had left in my 71-year-old legs. One kick. Nothing. 2 kicks. The wood groaned. 3 kicks. The door flew open, spilling me out into the cool, damp alleyway. I collapsed on the wet asphalt, gasping for air, retching as the smoke cleared from my chest. Behind me, the shop was roaring. My sanctuary. My cover. The place where I had healed from 30 years of violence was now being consumed by it. I dragged myself away from the building, leaning against a dumpster. I wiped the soot from my eyes and looked up. I expected to see the fire spreading. I expected to see the end of everything. Instead, I saw the neighborhood. It started with a shout, then a scream, then a stampede. The people of 8th Street didn't run away from the fire. They ran toward it. Mrs. Higgins was there, still in her bathrobe, dragging a garden hose from her front yard. Jerome, the homeless veteran who watched the street for me, was shouting orders like a drill sergeant. Form a line. Get the buckets. Move that car. And then came the young men. The boys with the hoodies and the loud music, the ones Bradley called thugs and criminals. They weren't looting. They were fighting. They were smashing the windows of the neighboring bakery to get fire extinguishers. They were forming a human chain, passing buckets of water. They were risking their lives to save a barber shop that gave them fresh cuts on credit when they had job interviews. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The fire department was coming. But the community was already there. I watched them, tears streaming down my soot-stained face. They weren't saving a building. They were saving me. They were saving what we stood for. Bradley thought he could burn us out. He thought fire would scare them away. He didn't understand that fire hardens steel. A news van skidded around the corner, then another. The cameras were rolling before the wheels stopped moving. They weren't filming a blighted neighborhood. They were filming a community uniting against an arson attack on a beloved elder. They were filming the tears of neighbors and the heroism of the youth. Bradley had just handed the media a story, but it wasn't the one he wrote. I stood up. I was shaking, covered in ash and blood, but I stood up. Jerome saw me. He ran over his face, wild with worry. Mac, you okay? We thought you were inside. I gripped his shoulder. I am okay, Jerome. Let me use your phone. He handed me his cracked smartphone. My hands were trembling, but my fingers remembered the number. I dialed. It rang 3 times. Bradley picked up. He didn't say hello. He just breathed into the phone, waiting to hear a police officer tell him that an old man had died in an accidental electrical fire. He didn't get a police officer. "Hello, Bradley," I said. The silence on the other end was heavy. It was the silence of a man whose heart had just skipped a beat. You are alive," he stammered. I looked at the flames reflecting in the puddles on the street. I looked at the flashing lights of the fire trucks turning the corner. I looked at the hundreds of people standing in the street, angry and defiant. "You made a miscalculation, son," I said, my voice sounding like grinding stones. "You learned how to do business in a boardroom. You don't know how things work on the street." "What are you talking about?" Bradley hissed. "Turn on the news, Bradley," I said. "Look at Channel 4. Look at what you did." I could hear him fumbling for a remote. I heard the faint sound of the news anchor describing a suspected hate crime against a pillar of the community. I heard the anchor mention that witnesses saw a black sedan speeding away moments before the explosion. "You tried to burn a building," I continued, watching the firemen blast water onto the roof. "But you forgot something. A barber shop isn't wood and brick. It is the heartbeat of the block." "You have no proof," Bradley screamed, his voice cracking. "You have nothing. I have everything." I corrected him. "You just woke up the whole city. You wanted to rezone the neighborhood. Well, congratulations. You just united it." And Bradley, what I am not hiding in the shadows anymore. I am standing right here in the light of the fire you started. And I am coming for you. Not with a gun, not with a badge, but with the truth. You just burned down your own future. I hung up the phone and handed it back to Jerome. The fire chief walked over to me. He was a big man I had known for 20 years. "Mac," he said, looking at the charred remains of the front entrance. "We found traces of accelerant. A lot of it. This wasn't an accident." "I know, Chief," I said, wiping my glasses on my dirty shirt. "It was an act of war." I looked into the camera of the nearest news crew. I knew Bradley was watching. I let him see my face. I let him see the ash and the blood. But mostly I let him see the eyes of a man who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The barbershop was gone. The scissors were melted. The chairs were ruined. But Cedric McNeil was still standing. And tomorrow Bradley Sterling was going to wish he had finished the job. Because there is nothing more dangerous than an old man who has seen his sanctuary burn. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom smelled exactly like the one where this nightmare began, a nauseating blend of fresh orchids, roasted duck, and old money. But tonight, the scent was sharper, laced with the metallic tang of fear and the manic energy of a man who knows he is running out of time. Bradley Sterling was throwing the party of the century. He called it a victory lap, a celebration of the new community initiative he had announced on the ashes of my barbershop. But I knew what it really was. It was a liquidation sale. I moved through the crowd with a silver tray balanced on my fingertips. I wore a white tuxedo jacket, black trousers, and a bow tie that felt like a noose. I wasn't Cedric McNeil, the business owner. I wasn't Agent McNeil, the hunter. I was just a waiter. A nameless, faceless servant whose only purpose was to keep the crystal glasses filled with vintage champagne. It is amazing how invisible you become when you put on a uniform. I walked past men who had seen my face on the news just hours ago. I walked past women who had tweeted their outrage about the fire at my shop. None of them looked at me. They saw the tray, not the man holding it. They took their drinks without a word, without eye contact, treating me like a piece of furniture that had learned to walk. This was my element. In the intelligence world, we call it gray man tactics. You don't hide in the shadows. You hide in plain sight. You become part of the background noise. I made my way toward the head table. It was set on a raised platform overlooking the sea of guests like a throne. Bradley sat in the center, looking every inch the king he believed himself to be. He was laughing too loud, drinking too fast. His eyes were bright and feverish. Next to him sat 3 men I recognized immediately from the files I had stolen. To the guests, they were international investors. To the FBI, they were high-ranking lieutenants in the Volkov crime syndicate. They weren't here for the chicken cordon bleu. They were here to collect their $50 million. I watched Bradley check his watch. He did it every 3 minutes. He was nervous. He had a private jet waiting at Dulles Airport, fueled and ready for a midnight departure to a non-extradition country. He just needed to get through this dinner, hand over the digital keys to the accounts, and disappear. I adjusted my grip on the tray and stepped up to the platform. I needed to get close. I needed to place a small device under the table, a signal booster that would allow Henderson and his team to override the hotel's secure Wi-Fi and hijack the audio system. "Champagne, sir?" I asked, keeping my head bowed and my voice low. One of the Russians grunted and took a glass. I moved down the line closer to Bradley. He was deep in conversation, speaking rapidly in English, while the men nodded slowly. "The transfer is complete," Bradley was whispering. "The funds are in the charity account. You will have full access codes by dessert. And then, gentlemen, I am officially retired." He laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. He reached for his empty glass without looking at me. "Fill it up, garçon," he snapped, "and keep it coming. We have a lot to celebrate." I reached for the bottle of Dom Perignon in the ice bucket. My hand, usually steady as a rock, trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back the urge to smash the bottle over his head. The movement caught his eye. He looked at my hand. He looked at the burn mark on my wrist, a souvenir from the fire the night before. He froze. Slowly, deliberately, Bradley turned his head. His eyes traveled up my arm past the white jacket to my face. The color drained from his skin so fast it looked like a magic trick. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at me, his brain trying to reconcile the impossibility of what he was seeing. Cedric McNeil, the man whose life he had destroyed, the man whose shop he had burned, was standing at his right hand pouring wine. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I poured the champagne, watching the golden bubbles rise to the rim. I stopped exactly at the edge, not spilling a drop. "You," Bradley whispered, his voice strangling in his throat. "What are you doing here?" The Russian to his left looked up, sensing the tension. "Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling?" Bradley looked at the Russian, then back at me. I saw the gears turning in his head. He could call security. He could make a scene. But if he did, he would have to explain why he was terrified of a waiter. He would have to explain to these dangerous men that he hadn't actually handled the problem like he said he had. Arrogance is a strange drug. It can make a man feel invincible even when the guillotine blade is falling. Bradley decided in that split second that I wasn't a threat. I was a conquered foe. I was a broke, homeless old man who had been forced to take a humiliating job to survive. He smiled. It was a cruel, twisted thing. "No problem at all," Dmitri, Bradley said, his voice regaining its swagger. "I just recognized our server." He turned his chair to face me fully. He looked me up and down, savoring the moment. "Well, well, well," Bradley said loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Look who it is. I guess the insurance money didn't come through, huh, Mac?" He reached out and tapped my bow tie with his finger. "I told you that you were obsolete," Bradley sneered, "but I have to admit this look suits you. It is good to see you finally accepting your place in the world, serving your betters." The Russians laughed, a low, rumbling sound. They didn't know the history, but they understood the dynamic, the strong eating the weak. I stood perfectly still. I let him have his moment. Every second he spent gloating was a second Henderson used to position the extraction team. "Cat got your tongue, Barber," Bradley taunted. "Or did the smoke damage your vocal cords?" I picked up the bottle again. I leaned in close, just like I had done at the first gala, but this time I wasn't whispering a warning. I was sealing his fate. More wine. "Mr. Sterling," I asked, my voice flat and subservient. Bradley laughed, slapping the table. "Yes, pour it. Pour it for my friends, and make sure you fill it to the top. I want you to work for that tip, Mac. I might even throw you a $10 bill if you don't spill it on my Italian shoes." He held up his glass, his hand shaking slightly. I poured. I watched the liquid rise. I watched his eyes glitter with malice. He thought he had won. He thought this was the ultimate victory, having his father-in-law serve him drinks at his getaway party. He didn't notice that while I was pouring with my right hand, my left hand was sliding a small black disc under the lip of the table directly beneath his microphone. "That is enough," Bradley barked when the glass was full. "Now get out of my face. You are depressing the guests." I bowed slightly. "As you wish, sir." I stepped back, fading into the shadows of the ballroom. I walked toward the service exit, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. I touched the earpiece hidden in my ear canal. "Asset is in place," I whispered into the collar of my shirt. "Audio bridge is active. "He is all yours, Director." I stopped at the edge of the room, turning back to watch. Bradley stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room went silent. He adjusted his tie, preparing to give the speech that was supposed to be his farewell to America. He had no idea that he wasn't speaking to a room of admirers anymore. He was about to speak to the entire world, and the voice that would answer him wasn't going to be a waiter's. It was going to be the voice of judgment. I checked my watch. 3, 2, 1. Showtime, Bradley. Let's see how you handle a customer who doesn't want a haircut but wants your head. The sound of a spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute is usually a polite request for silence, but when Bradley Sterling did it that night, it sounded like a gavel striking a death sentence. The ballroom went quiet. The air conditioning hummed a low bass note beneath the rustle of expensive silk gowns and the clinking of silverware. I stood in the back near the heavy velvet curtains, my hands clasped behind my back, my posture reverting from the slump of a servant to the parade rest of a soldier. Bradley gripped the podium with both hands. He looked out over the sea of faces, the investors, the politicians, the criminals disguised as businessmen. He was sweating. I could see the sheen of perspiration on his forehead under the harsh stage lights, but his smile was fixed, a porcelain mask of confidence that was about to shatter. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice booming through the high-end sound system. "We are standing on the precipice of history. Sterling Horizons is not just a company, it is a revolution. We have faced challenges, we have faced doubters, we have faced small-minded people who wanted to drag us down into the dirt with them." He paused for effect, looking directly at the table where the Russian mobsters sat. They didn't smile. They just watched him like wolves watching a wounded deer. "You know," Bradley continued, his voice dripping with false humility, "my own father-in-law is one of those people. A good man in his own way, I suppose. But a simple man, a man who has spent 50 years staring at the back of people's heads, cutting hair, sweeping floors, living paycheck to paycheck. He told me I was dreaming too big. He told me to play it safe." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. Bradley fed off it. He grew bolder. "He is here tonight actually serving drinks. Can you believe that a man his age still hustling for tips? It is sad, really, but it proves a point I have always made. There are wolves and there are sheep. There are visionaries and there are barbers. And tonight, gentlemen, we proved that the future belongs to the wolves." He raised his glass. The room prepared to toast. And that was when I pressed the button on my phone. A high-pitched screech of electronic feedback tore through the room. Guests covered their ears, wincing in pain. The speakers mounted on the walls popped and crackled, static hissing like an angry snake. Bradley recoiled from the microphone, looking around wildly. "What is going on?" he snapped at the sound technician in the corner. "Cut the feed! Fix it!" But the technician was frantically typing on his console, shaking his head. He was locked out. I had bridged the system. The audio was no longer coming from the mixing board. It was coming from the device in my pocket. Then the ringing started. It wasn't a normal phone ring. It was the distinct, jarring tone of a secure government line amplified to 120 decibels. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling, bouncing off the marble pillars, filling every inch of the room. Ring, ring, ring. Bradley stared at the speakers, confused. The guests began to murmur. The Russian lieutenants stood up, their hands drifting toward the insides of their jackets. I stepped out from the shadows. I didn't walk like a waiter anymore. I walked with the heavy, deliberate stride of a man who owns the ground he steps on. I pulled the phone from my pocket. The screen was glowing a bright, ominous red. I held the phone up. The entire room turned to look at me. Bradley squinted, blinded by the stage lights, trying to make out the figure approaching him. "Answer it, Bradley," I said. My voice didn't need to be shouted. The microphone I had planted under his table picked up my words and threw them across the room. He froze. He recognized the voice. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Get security. Get this crazy old man out of here." I didn't stop. I walked right up to the edge of the platform. I swiped the screen answering the call. I tapped the speaker icon. The room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the air had been sucked out. "Agent McNeil," a voice boomed from the speakers. It was a voice of absolute authority, a voice that sounded like gravel and iron. It was a voice that every person in that room who worked in Washington recognized instantly. "I am here, Director," I replied, calm and steady. "This is Director Vance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," the voice continued. The audio quality was crystal clear. Every syllable hit Bradley like a physical blow. "We have executed Federal Warrant 774 Alpha. The accounts associated with Sterling Horizons, including the offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands and the Shell Corporation in Zurich, have been seized." Bradley dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the stage, spraying shards of crystal and expensive wine over his shoes. He grabbed the podium to keep from falling. "What?" he whispered. "No, that is impossible." Director Vance continued, ignoring the interruption. "The funds transferred to the Heritage Foundation charity have been intercepted. We have also secured the warehouse on 4th Street. The cash reserves are in federal custody." The Russians looked at each other. They didn't panic. They calculated. In 1 second, they realized the money was gone. In the next second, they realized Bradley was a liability. They began to back away toward the exits, moving silently. I looked up at Bradley. His face was gray. His lips were trembling. He looked at the phone in my hand as if it were a bomb. "Who is that?" he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal of terror. "Who is on the phone, Mac? Is this some kind of joke? Is this an actor?" Director Vance heard him. "Mr. Sterling, this is not a joke. This is the end of the line. Federal agents have surrounded the building. All exits are secured. Air traffic control has grounded your private aircraft at Dulles. You are currently under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Bradley shook his head violently. He looked at the crowd, searching for an ally, searching for his lawyers, searching for anyone who could stop the nightmare. But no one moved. The senators were looking at their feet. The investors were already texting their own lawyers. He was alone on an island, and the tide was rising fast. He looked down at me. He looked at the white tuxedo jacket. He looked at the hands that he had mocked just moments ago. "Agent," he stammered. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. You are an agent." I didn't smile. There was no joy in this. Just the cold satisfaction of a job done right. "I was never just a barber, Bradley," I said, my voice amplified through the room. "I was a cleaner. And you are the mess." Bradley laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. Tears streamed down his face. "You are lying," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are a nobody. You are a failure. You cut hair for $10. You are just a barber. You are just a stupid old barber." I lowered the phone. I looked him dead in the eye. "And you are broke, son," I said. The doors to the ballroom burst open, but it wasn't the hotel staff. It was a dozen men in windbreakers with those 3 bright yellow letters emblazoned on the back. FBI. Bradley Sterling collapsed to his knees on the stage, surrounded by the shards of his broken glass and his broken life. The guests gasped as the agents swarmed the room, but I didn't watch them. I watched him. I watched the realization wash over him that the man he had underestimated, the man he had tried to bury, was the one holding the shovel. The silence in the ballroom was heavier than the chandeliers hanging above us. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Bradley's jagged breathing as he knelt on the stage, surrounded by the shards of his shattered champagne glass. He looked small. The king of the world had been reduced to a frightened child in a ruined suit. The guests, the senators, the investors, they all stared at him with a mixture of horror and revulsion. They were watching a contagion, and they were desperate to distance themselves from the infection. I stood over him. I was no longer the servant in the shadows. I was the center of gravity in the room. I reached up behind my neck and untied the knot of the white service apron. The fabric made a soft rustling sound as it fell to the floor, pooling around my polished shoes like a surrendered flag. I adjusted my cufflinks. I smoothed the lapels of my tuxedo jacket. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement that every eye in the room followed, I reached inside my jacket. Bradley flinched. He thought I was reaching for a gun. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, cutting his palms on the broken glass, leaving smears of blood on the pristine white stage. "Don't kill me," he whimpered. "Please, Mac. Don't kill me." I didn't pull out a weapon. I didn't need one. I pulled out a leather bifold wallet worn smooth by decades of use. I flipped it open. The gold badge inside caught the harsh stage lights and threw a beam of authority right into his eyes. It was an old badge, heavy and scarred, earned in the trenches of the war on drugs and the war on terror. It said Federal Bureau of Investigation. It said Special Agent. The gasp from the crowd was audible. You were right about one thing, Bradley, I said, my voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. I am a barber. That part wasn't a lie. I took a step closer to him. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. But you misunderstood the nature of my profession, I continued. You think a barber just cuts hair. You think we just make people look pretty. But you forgot the history of the trade. In the old days, barbers were surgeons. We didn't just trim beards. We bled the sick. We cut out the infection to save the patient. I leaned down, bringing my face level with his. And I specialize in a very specific type of surgery, son. I don't cut hair. I excise financial tumors. I cut out the rot that people like you infect this country with. And you, Bradley, you are the biggest, ugliest tumor I have ever had the pleasure of removing. Bradley stared at the badge, his eyes wide and vacant. The reality was too big for his brain to process. The old man he had humiliated, the man he had given a shoeshine box to, was a federal legend. The spell was broken by movement at the head table. The 3 Russians, the men Bradley had been trying to impress, were not paralyzed by fear. They were professionals. They saw the badge and they knew the window of opportunity was closing in seconds. Dmitri, the leader, kicked his chair back. He didn't look at Bradley. He didn't look at me. He looked at the service exit 20 feet away. He signaled to his 2 enforcers. They moved with the synchronized precision of a wolf pack, hands reaching into their tailored jackets, not for wallets, but for suppressors. Secure the exit, Dmitri shouted in Russian, shoving a waiter aside as he bolted for the kitchen doors. But the kitchen doors didn't open. Instead, the double doors swung inward with a crash. But it wasn't the kitchen staff. The flurry of movement that followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination. The older woman playing the cello in the string quartet suddenly dropped her bow. She reached under her chair and pulled out an MP5 submachine gun. She racked the slide and leveled it at the Russians. "Federal agents, drop it!" she screamed. The bartender, a man who had been mixing martinis all night, vaulted over the bar. He had a Glock 19 in his hand and a badge around his neck. "Get down, everybody down!" The guests screamed and dove under the tables. Pearls scattered on the floor. Expensive clutches were abandoned. The illusion of high society evaporated, replaced by the brutal reality of a federal takedown. Dmitri froze. He looked at the cellist. He looked at the bartender. He looked at the exits where men in windbreakers were now pouring in. He realized he was in a box I had built. He slowly raised his hands. His bodyguards did the same. They knew the math. 3 guns against 30. There was no way out. Bradley watched his partners, his protection, surrender without firing a shot. He looked around the room. The people he thought were his friends, the people he thought were his admirers, were cowering on the floor. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone. He looked up at me. Tears were streaming down his face now, mixing with the sweat. "Mac," he sobbed. "Mac, please. You have to help me. They will kill me in a prison. You know they will. I am family. I am Maya's husband." I looked at him with zero pity. I thought about Maya shivering in my shop. I thought about the fire. I thought about the drugs he planted. "You stopped being family the moment you signed my daughter's name to a felony, Bradley," I said, cold as ice. I turned my back on him. I signaled to 2 agents who were coming up the stairs of the stage. "Get him out of my sight," I ordered. The agents grabbed Bradley by the arms. He didn't fight. He went limp, a dead weight. As they dragged him away, his feet trailing through the broken glass and spilled wine, he kept screaming my name. But I didn't turn around. I looked out at the ballroom. The chaos was settling into control. Agents were zip-tying the Russians. Other agents were securing the exits and beginning to process the guests as witnesses. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. I wiped a smudge of champagne off my badge. I looked at it for a moment, then clipped it onto my belt. I walked down the steps of the stage. The cellist, the agent who had been undercover in the quartet, nodded to me as I passed. "Nice speech, Mac," she said. I nodded back. "Just a little trim off the top, agent. Just a little trim." I walked toward the main doors. The night wasn't over. I had one more stop to make. I had to go find Maya. I had to tell her that the monster was gone and that her father was coming home. Not as a barber, not as an agent, but as the man who kept his promise. I thought the war was over. I thought the enemy was neutralized. But a cornered rat doesn't just surrender, it bites. As the agents dragged Bradley toward the exit, the heavy double doors swung open again. Maya stood there. She was soaking wet from the rain, her eyes wild with terror. She had seen the news. She had seen the fire. She had come to find me to make sure her father was alive. Bradley saw her before I did. In a burst of adrenaline that only a desperate man possesses, he twisted violently, breaking the grip of the agents holding him. He didn't run for the door. He ran for her. Before anyone could react, he had his arm around her neck. He pressed a shard of the broken champagne glass against her throat. The jagged crystal caught the light, trembling just millimeters from her pulse. "Back off," he screamed, his voice shredding the silence. "Back off or I will open her up. I swear to God I will do it." The room froze. The agents raised their weapons, a dozen red laser dots dancing on Bradley's forehead. But they couldn't shoot. The angle was too tight. He was using my daughter, his own wife, as a human shield. Maya didn't scream. She looked at me. Her eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of fear and apology. She thought this was her fault. She thought she had caused this. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut, heavier and darker than anything I had felt before. This wasn't business anymore. This wasn't justice. This was an abomination. I held up my hand, signaling the tactical team to hold their fire. I stepped forward. The glass crunched under my feet. "Let her go, Bradley," I said. My voice was quiet, almost gentle. It was the voice you use to talk a jumper off a ledge. He laughed, a manic, wet sound. "You think you won, Mac. You think this is over. I am walking out of here, and she is coming with me. If anyone follows us, if I see one cop car, she dies. Do you hear me? She dies." I didn't stop walking. I moved slow, rhythmic steps. I looked him right in the eye. I didn't look at the shard of glass. I didn't look at Maya. I focused entirely on him. "You are not going anywhere, son," I said. "And do you know why?" He tightened his grip. Maya gasped, a small trickle of blood appearing on her neck. "Shut up," Bradley yelled. "Shut up and get me a car, because you have nowhere to go." I continued, stopping 10 feet away from him. I reached into my pocket. He flinched, dragging Maya back a step. But I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper. The receipt from my final hack. "You are planning to run to Antigua," I said, reading from the paper. "You have a chartered flight waiting. You plan to access the emergency fund you buried in the Sovereign Bank of Nevis." Bradley's eyes widened. "How do you—" "Account number 8429 Bravo," I recited, memorized like a prayer. "Routing number 3301. I looked up at him. "I accessed that account 4 minutes ago, Bradley. Do you want to know the balance?" He shook his head. "No. No, zero." I said the word, hitting him like a physical slap. I took another step. "Then there is the crypto wallet, the one you thought was untraceable. Key code Alpha Zulu 9, balance 0. Bradley was breathing hard now, hyperventilating. The hand holding the glass began to shake violently, and the cash in the warehouse seized. The gold in the safety deposit box confiscated. I stopped 3 feet from him. I was close enough to smell his fear. "You are a pauper, Bradley. You have no money. You have no friends. You have no leverage. Even if you walk out of here, where will you go? You can't buy a ticket. You can't buy a burger. You are nothing." Bradley looked at me, then he looked at the agents surrounding him. He looked at the future that awaited him. A life on the run with no resources, or a life in a cell. The illusion of power, the only thing that kept him standing, evaporated. He looked at Maya. He looked at the woman who had loved him, the woman he was threatening to kill. He saw the revulsion in her eyes. He realized that even his hostage didn't fear him anymore. She pitied him. The shard of glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a harmless tinkle. Bradley slumped against Maya, his legs giving out. He began to sob, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. He slid down to the floor, curling into a fetal ball, burying his face in his hands. "It is over," he moaned. "It is all over." Maya stepped away from him. She didn't run. She walked. She walked straight into my arms. I held her tight, feeling her heart hammering against my chest. I looked over her shoulder at the man on the floor. 2 agents moved in, pulling his hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "Take him away," I whispered into Maya's hair. "It is done, baby girl. The wolf has no teeth." The interrogation room was quiet now. The chaos of the ballroom felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by the low hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of Agent Henderson's fingers on a metal table. Maya sat across from me, wrapped in a thick wool blanket that smelled of government detergent. She held a cup of lukewarm tea in both hands, staring into the dark liquid as if it held the answers to the questions spinning in her mind. I sat next to her, not touching her, just letting my presence be a solid wall against the storm she had just survived. I had removed my tuxedo jacket. My white shirt was stained with soot from the fire and wine from the party, a map of the last 48 hours. Henderson slid a heavy file box across the table. It made a scraping sound that made Maya flinch. "This is it," Henderson said softly. "Declassified per Director Vance's orders. She needs to see this Mac." I looked at the box. For 30 years, that box had been my shadow. It contained the reasons I missed birthdays. It contained the reasons I wasn't there when Maya fell off her bike in the 3rd grade. It contained the reasons why Esther spent so many nights alone praying to a God she hoped was listening. I nodded slowly. Henderson stood up and walked out, closing the heavy door behind him to give us privacy. Maya looked at the box. It was stamped with red ink. "Top secret. Eyes only. Classified level 5. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "It is the truth, baby girl," I said. "It is the story I could never tell you." She reached out with a trembling hand and flipped open the lid. The first file was from 1985. She was 3 years old then. I remember that year, she said, picking up a photograph clipped to a report. "You told Mom you were going to Detroit to work on the assembly line for 6 months. We didn't hear from you for weeks. Mom cried every night." I looked at the photo. It wasn't Detroit. It was a safe house in Bogota. I was wearing fatigues, holding a tactical radio, standing next to a seized pile of cocaine that was funding a domestic terror cell. "I wasn't in Detroit, Maya," I said gently. "I was part of an extraction team. We were stopping a shipment that would have put enough poison on the streets to kill half the city." She turned the page. 1992. Her 10th birthday. "You missed my play," she said, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I played the lead angel. I looked for you in the audience until the curtain came down. You sent a postcard from Ohio. You said you were fixing roofs." I swallowed the lump in my throat. That was the hardest mission of my career. "I wasn't fixing roofs," I said. "I was deep undercover in a financial firm in New York that was laundering money for arms dealers. If I had made one phone call, if I had come home for one day, they would have killed me, and they would have found you." Maya flipped through the pages faster now. She saw the commendations. She saw the letters from presidents. She saw the photos of me with world leaders, with generals, with people whose names were in history books. She stopped at a document from 5 years ago. It was my retirement paperwork. "Reason for discharge," she read aloud. "Voluntary, personal desire to pursue a quiet life." She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, searching my face as if she were seeing me for the first time. "You didn't retire because you were old," she said. "You didn't become a barber because you couldn't do anything else." "No," I said. "I retired because I was tired of the noise. I was tired of the secrets. I wanted to be in a place where the only thing I had to worry about was a straight razor and a clean towel. I wanted to be near you. I wanted to make up for the lost time." She dropped the file. She covered her face with her hands and began to weep. It wasn't the terrified sobbing from earlier. It was the deep, gut-wrenching cry of a child realizing they had been wrong about the hero in their life. "Bradley told me you were a failure," she choked out between sobs. "He told me you were jealous of his success because you never accomplished anything. He made me look down on you. God. Daddy, I was so ashamed of the barbershop. I was so ashamed of you. I moved then. I reached out and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my chest, gripping my shirt like she was drowning. I rested my chin on the top of her head, smelling the rain and the fear and the faint scent of the perfume she had worn to the party. "It is okay," I whispered, rocking her back and forth. "It is okay. You didn't know. I didn't want you to know." "Why?" she asked, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me treat you like that?" "Because I wanted you to have a father, not an agent," I said, wiping a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "I wanted you to think the world was simple. I wanted you to think that safety was normal. Men like me, Maya, we live in the dark, so people like you can live in the light. I didn't want the darkness to touch you." She shook her head. But you came back. You came back into the dark for me. I looked at the file box, then back at her. I retired to cut hair because I wanted peace, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. I put down my gun because I promised your mother I would live a gentle life. But the moment that man threatened you, the moment he put your name on those papers, the peace ended. I took her hands in mine. They were cold, but they were starting to warm up. Maya, listen to me. I would burn down the whole world to keep you safe. I would come out of retirement 1,000 times. I would face every cartel, every army, every monster on this earth if it meant you could sleep soundly at night. She squeezed my hands. You saved me, Daddy. You saved me from prison. You saved me from him. I kissed her forehead. We saved each other, kiddo. Now dry your eyes. Henderson is coming back, and I don't want him to think I made you cry. Agents don't cry. She managed a weak, watery smile. I am not an agent. No, I smiled back. You are something much more important. You are a McNeil, and McNeils don't break. The door opened and Henderson stepped back in. He looked at the open box, then at the two of us. He saw the shift in the room. The distance was gone. The wall Bradley had built between father and daughter had been demolished. We have a car waiting to take you to a safe house, Henderson said. Until the trial is over, we need to keep you both off the grid. I stood up, helping Maya to her feet. She held onto my arm, not for support, but for connection. She walked tall, her head held high, mirroring my posture. Let's go, Daddy, she said. I picked up the file box. I didn't close it. I handed it to Henderson. Burn it, I said. Henderson looked surprised. All of it. But Mac, this is your legacy. This is history. I looked at Maya. I looked at the way she was holding my arm. No, I said. That is history. This is my legacy. I don't need a file to tell me who I am, and I don't need secrets anymore. I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders and walked her out of the interrogation room. We walked down the long hallway of the precinct, past the officers who nodded in respect, past the detectives who looked away in shame. We walked out into the cool night air of Washington, D.C. The rain had stopped. The air was clean. I am hungry, Maya said suddenly. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed for real in days. I know a place, I said. It is an all-night diner on 4th Street. Best pancakes in the city. And the owner, he owes me a favor. For cutting his hair, she asked, teasing me. No, I winked. For saving his country. But let's keep that between us. We walked into the night, leaving the shadows behind. I was Cedric McNeil. I was a barber. I was a father. And for the first time in a long time, all three of those things felt like enough. The gavel didn't sound like a hammer hitting wood. It sounded like a heavy iron door slamming shut on a life of greed. 25 years. That was the sentence the federal judge handed down to Bradley Sterling. No possibility of parole for at least 20. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, my hands folded on my lap, watching the man who had tried to erase me being led away in a jumpsuit that matched the color of the prison walls. He didn't look back. He didn't look at the investors he had swindled, and he didn't look at the wife he had betrayed. He kept his eyes on the floor, a man who had built a castle on quicksand and was finally understanding the nature of gravity. Maya sat beside me. She didn't cry. She had no tears left for him. When the district attorney officially announced that all charges against her were dropped, citing the overwhelming evidence of coercion and fraud I had provided, she simply closed her eyes and exhaled. It was the breath of a woman who had been holding it for 5 years. We walked out of that courthouse into the bright D.C. sunlight, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't check her reflection in the window to see if she looked perfect. She just looked free. Rebuilding Fade and Soul took 3 months. I didn't hire a fancy construction firm. I didn't need to. The neighborhood showed up. Jerome, my eyes on the street, turned out to be a wizard with a paintbrush. He painted the walls a warm, deep mahogany. Mrs. Higgins organized a potluck every single day for the volunteers. The young men who used to hang out on the corner learned how to lay tile and install drywall under my supervision. We weren't just fixing a building, we were reinforcing the foundation of our community. When we finally reopened the line wrapped around the block, I had to hire 2 new barbers just to keep up with the demand. They aren't just coming for the haircuts, though. They are coming for the legend. They want to sit in the chair of the old man who took down a financial empire with a pair of scissors and a burner phone. I don't charge them extra for the story, but I do make sure they tip the young barbers well. The shop looks different now. It is cleaner, brighter. But the soul is the same. The smell of bay rum and talcum powder still hangs in the air. The jazz music still plays softly from the speakers. And behind the register on the wall that was once blackened by smoke, there are two photographs. The first is Esther smiling her eternal smile watching over us. But right next to her in a simple wooden frame is a picture I had kept hidden in the dark for 30 years. It shows a younger Cedric McNeil standing in the Oval Office shaking hands with the President of the United States. It was taken the day I received the Medal of Valor for a classified operation in '92. For decades I was afraid that showing that photo would endanger my family. I thought being a hero meant being invisible. But I learned something in the fire. I learned that hiding who you are doesn't protect the people you love. Being true to yourself does. I stood by the chair sweeping the floor as the late afternoon sun slanted through the new plate glass window. The bell chimed. A young man walked in looking nervous, clutching a resume. "Are you Mac?" he asked. I stopped sweeping. I looked him up and down, seeing the hunger in his eyes, the same hunger I had when I was his age. "I am Mac," I said. "I heard you are hiring," he said, "but I don't know if I am good enough." I smiled. I pointed to the empty chair. "It is not about how good you are with the scissors, son," I said. "It is about what you stand for when the scissors are down. Grab a broom. Let's see how you handle the mess before we see how you handle the success." He grabbed a broom and started sweeping. I watched him, and I knew that Fade and Soul was in good hands. The war was over. The shop was open. And Cedric McNeil was finally truly home. The hydraulic chair hissed softly as I pumped it up, raising my 7-year-old grandson Malik to eye level. He sat there with a cape draped over his shoulders that was 3 sizes too big. His small hands gripping the armrests, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. It was Saturday morning at Fade and Soul. The sun was streaming through the new glass windows, dancing on the checkerboard floor, and the air smelled of fresh coffee and bay rum. I picked up my favorite pair of wall clippers. They were heavy, humming with a low, steady vibration that I felt in my bones. I handed them to Malik. "Hold it steady, little man," I said softly. "Don't grip it too tight. If you choke it, you lose the feel. You have to let it become part of your hand." Malik took the clippers. His hand wobbled a bit. He looked at me, looking for reassurance. "Grandpa Mac," he asked, "is this how you became a hero? By cutting hair?" I chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that came from a place of pure peace. I looked over at the waiting area. Maya was sitting there reading a book, looking up every few seconds to smile at us. She looked younger now. The stress lines around her eyes had smoothed out. The shadow of Bradley Sterling was gone, replaced by the light of a life reclaimed. I put my large, calloused hand over Malik's small one, guiding the blade through the air. "Being a hero isn't about fighting bad guys, Malik," I said. "It isn't about guns or badges or getting your name in the paper." "Then what is it?" he asked, turning off the clippers to listen. I looked at my hands. They were rough. They were scarred. They were the hands of a black man who had worked every single day of his life, whether digging trenches in the rain or digging through financial records in the dark. To the world, they were just the hands of a servant. To Bradley, they were the hands of a failure. But to the boy sitting in front of me, they were the safest place on earth. "Being a hero is about showing up," I said. "It is about doing the work that nobody else wants to do. It is about protecting the people you love even when they don't know you are doing it. And sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is just be a good man in a world that wants you to be angry." I turned the clippers back on. "Now watch the line I instructed. Stay focused. If you rush, you make mistakes. And in this shop, we don't rush. We build." Malik nodded, his face a mask of concentration. He moved the clippers slowly, carefully. He was learning patience. He was learning discipline. He was learning the things that money couldn't buy and that arrogance couldn't fake. I looked around my shop. It was full. Men were laughing in the other chairs. The conversation was loud and joyful. This was my kingdom. I wasn't Director McNeil here. I wasn't a special agent. I was Mac. And looking at my grandson, seeing the future in his eyes, I realized that this was the most important mission I had ever undertaken. Bradley looked at a book and saw only the cover. He saw a barber and assumed he saw a fool. He didn't know that the story inside was written in blood and steel. But Malik would know the whole story. He would know that a man is not defined by the title on his business card, but by the integrity in his heart. I rested my hand on Malik's shoulder. "Good job," I whispered. "You have got the touch." He beamed at me, a smile that lit up the room. "I am going to be just like you, Grandpa," he said. I smiled back, blinking away a sudden tear. "You be better than me, son. You be better." I walked to the window and flipped the sign to open. The city was moving outside, full of noise and chaos, but inside everything was steady. "I am Cedric McNeil. I am 71 years old. I have hunted wolves and I have saved lambs. But right now, I am just a grandfather teaching a boy how to hold a steady hand. And that is the only legacy that matters. Respect isn't built on the title on your business card or the price of your suit. It is forged in the silence of sacrifice and the integrity of your actions when no one is watching." Bradley thought power came from humiliating others, but he learned the hard way that the quietest man in the room is often the one holding the keys to the castle. Never mistake a man's humility for weakness, nor his silence for ignorance. A lion doesn't need to roar to be dangerous. It just needs to wait for the hyena to make a mistake. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever been underestimated, or if you believe that true strength comes from within, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to know where you are listening from, so drop your city and country in the comments below. And tell me, have you ever had to stand your ground against someone who thought they were better than you? Let's talk about it. Until next time, stay sharp, stay humble, and never let anyone tell you who you are.